Hi everybody, welcome to Missy's Imaginings. Before we get into our project, I have a little bit of news, just as a little update, in case you're wanting some tips on some sewing supplies that I have discovered. I've never seen these before, but at the Dollar Tree, I was in there the other day and they now have elastic, and not only white elastic, but pink elastic, red elastic, orange elastic, gray elastic, and blue elastic. It's all 1/4 inch elastic, and let me look and see what the measurement is. It is 10 meters or 10.9 yards for $1.25. So with all the color selection and the amount of elastic on the package, so hopefully you can kind of see there, that is a lot of elastic for $1.25. And I don't know how it is in a lot of other places, but here in the Northwest, elastic is getting more and more expensive. Walmart might be the least expensive that I've personally found elastic, but I know even if I go to Joann's, it's getting more and more expensive, and it's just 1/4 inch elastic. But I like the option of a lot of colors, because if you're sewing it directly to the fabric rather than in a casing, but you're pulling it to sew it directly on the fabric and let it just kind of scrunch up your fabric, it is nice to have the color options that can be close to the color you're using, just so it looks fun, it looks pretty. Or if you're using it in like the hem of bloomers, yeah, stockings, wig caps, anything like that. It's just fun to have a variety of colors to choose from. So that was all at Dollar Tree for $1.25, and I thought that was a really good thing I wanted to share with you. So if you haven't been into Dollar Tree, their craft section is improving, and so I was really happy about that. And a few of you mentioned that you might enjoy watching some resin work, and I've been doing some practicing. But while at Dollar Tree, I also found these shapes, which I believe are probably supposed to be coasters. Here again, I can't read it. Yes, coasters. There's a flower and a circle, and there was also one that was a heart-shaped coaster, but because of the narrow point on one end versus the larger part, I didn't know how that would affect the balance for the purpose that I am considering. I also found some wooden dowels, and I thought it would be fun to, let's see if we can open one of these up, to try them as a possibility for making a doll stand. So I don't know. And I thought then the doll stand could actually, I could find some sort of a peg item, such as these plastic cylinders inside a thing of thread that could be like hot glued down to have the opening for the dowel, or just even glue that on there and have the dowel inserted in that. So I'm still debating on how to make it work, but I thought it was a very inexpensive option for experimentation. So I got the flower and the circle to perhaps make some doll stand bases, and then I prefer, because this is just a dowel, and it would work kind of on a 3rd scale doll, it would be up a little bit here, and then to make the saddle part that the doll would actually rest on, I didn't know if we could use like the curvature of part of the flower, or because I think this would be too large, or there were some little geometric shapes that were real narrow that could perhaps be done, and then make several of them, and then with resin glue them essentially together to create the saddle that would attach to the top of the post to kind of help hold the doll up. So a lot of experimenting. I don't know if any of it will work, but it might be fun to try. because doll stands are so expensive, especially for nice ones. And if we could have one that would be pretty, it'd be fairly heavy on the base, and then of course the weight of the doll would help. But I don't know, we'll see if it works. So I did that and found some dowels that would be the stand part. Those were all at Dollar Tree as well for $1.25. Then I found in the tooling section, which to me seemed kind of fun, just an extended tool picker upper. I don't know why I haven't thought of it before. I don't know why, but when I drop pins or needles, it makes it an easy way to pick it up off the floor while I'm sewing. So that's just another item that you can find at Dollar Tree for your sewing room, that it just makes it easy to pick up metal objects that are that would be picked up by a magnet when you drop them. So for needles and pins, snaps, things like that, if you need to pick them up off the floor, you can swirl this around and get them all. And there you go. And that was $1.25. Then the other news, oh, hello lamp, is in my resin adventures, I tried making some more eyeballs. So we have a variety here, and I will put a picture just to make them a little bit more visible. But I did have some fun creating. A lot of these are going to be the same color, just because I was kind of working all at once and I didn't want to mix a lot of different colors. But I have some different sizes with different size pupils, so I really like getting the molds that have a lot of variety of not only the size and the diameter of the eyeball itself, but the pupil as well. I'll probably have some available at the doll show coming up in October. I will be at the Wagon Wheel Dollars Doll Show October 12th at the Polk County Fairgrounds here in Oregon. So if you are local or that isn't too far of a jaunt for you to travel, I will be there October 12th, and many of our projects that we've been working on I will have at my table, and they will be available to purchase at the doll show. And then some of these eyeballs will probably be pretty inexpensive, so I don't know, maybe a couple dollars. I mean, they're not perfect, but it is fun to have some options that are just ready to go in a doll's eye, and you don't have to wait for the shipping. There we go. So we have these that will be there, and so I thought I'd fill you in on that, as well as a lot of the outfits, like the theme park bounding that we did, as well as some of our coat outfits. I need to get all 7 done before the show. So that brings us to our project today. We'll be putting together the blue coat set. So let's see if we'll put a picture up here of this pattern set. And here again, I will have the blue coat. It will have a white on white print for the pants, and then the shirt. So the blue, it's like a royal blue vinyl for the coat, and then the shirt is this print, which I really liked. So it has like the dark blue and kind of a tealy seafoam blue color, and I think that'll look really good together. So that is our next outfit that we're going to work on. So we'll change up the table, get the sewing machine out. So this is outfit number 5, and then after this we'll only have 2 left. So here we go. For this outfit, we have the short sleeve shirt that will fasten in the back, just like we've done several times before. And so it's just all cotton, so I will leave the entire back seam open, and so I will be finishing these edges with serging and turning it in so that we can have snaps all down the back, and then the shirt will go on the doll from the front and close in the back with short sleeves. I also cut some of the fabric on the bias here because I am going to put those pieces together. So to create the bias tape, we will put the fabric together with right sides, and the tips will stick out just enough to account for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So the seam, let's see, we'll get our little ruler here. And so the seam will run right here from the point where the fabric actually overlaps to where it overlaps on the other end. And then when you open that up, let's see here if we can do it without actually sewing, then when you open it up, it is even on both the edges there. And so I will be making some bias tape to go ahead and go around the neckline of that shirt. To go around the edge of the shirt, it's just easier if you have bias tape, and so this fabric is cut at a 45-degree angle against the weft and weave of the grain so that it does have stretch to it, which makes it cut on the bias, makes it bias tape. So I'll be getting that ready, and then because I'm going to finish this off with bias tape, once I get the shoulders put together, then like on the other shirts, I will be trimming away a little bit of this neckline because the top edge of my bias tape, so let's go ahead and act like we're folding it in here, like so. It's going to be narrow, so it's only going to be about this wide. Here we go. See if my fingers can hold it. So once we get the bias tape done, it's like this wide. If you take a look at your pattern, the actual seam line, there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. So the seam line is actually a 1/4 inch in. And I want the top edge of fold of my bias tape to actually rest on what would be the seam allowance edge, so all the seam allowance would be gone. So I'm just going to trim this away, and then when I sew it on, rather than trying to sew a seam allowance and then fold all this inside, I'm just going to take the bias tape, if I can fold it again here, and it will be laid on to the actual cut edge of the fabric and then just top stitched on. So if I did it like it is right now, then that seam allowance would come up and it would be really close to the neck, and the neck opening wouldn't be as open as I want it. So I will trim away most of what would be the seam allowance so that that finished edge of bias tape will rest on the actual edge of what that seam line would be. So that will be done on the shirt, and it's pretty much what we've done in some of the other patterns, so we won't spend a lot of time showing this being sewn, but I just kind of wanted to go over it in case you're new to the series here. You can go back and check out on the very first video we talked about putting this together. So then we come to the pants, and let's see if this will show up a little bit more than it did in the intro. But it's a white on white pattern, and this pair of pants is also the yoke back pattern. So here's the back yoke. So this will be done just like we did in the green outfit, I believe. So that brings us to our coat, which is the main focal point of the video. The 7 coats and 7 colors. This is our blue coat, and this is the color I picked for RM, or Namjoon. And I just think he looks good in blue, and it kind of goes with the microphone thing. So on the coat, in this instance, I am going to have the inside of the collar be the fabric here. So it will be cut, well, it is cut. It will be sewn with right sides together, and then I will trim away the seam allowance. We'll sew up, across, and down. Trim away the seam allowance, then flip it right side out, and then top stitch that into place, and then I will put a stay stitching along the bottom edge just to hold those two pieces together. So that's what the collar will look like. Then I have the front and back facing of the coat. That's also going to be of the printed fabric that's just like the shirt. And so I will start by putting these two pieces, or these three pieces, together at the shoulder. So we'll sew these pieces here, and these will go here. And then once that's sewn together at the shoulder, I will serge up the one outside edge all the way around and back down, so that that will be a nice finished edge of fabric, because that will be exposed in the finished garment. So that's kind of some of our prep stitching that we always do. Then on the actual pieces of the coat, this coat has, let's see, we'll do the back yoke. That's kind of common. So we will sew the back together, but I will transfer a line from the pattern. I'm only going to sew to about here where my thumb is, and then the bottom part of the coat will be an open slit. Now I'm debating. I don't know if I'm going to have it bend over like we did on the green coat, or if I'm just going to go ahead and let that be a separate opening. I may just let it be separate so that it will be different, and we can show you that different option for sewing that. Then once the back pieces are done and put together on the lower back, then we have a yoke for the top section of the back of the coat. So we'll put those together, center back, and then attach the yoke, and then I will top stitch with this fabric going up towards the yoke. So we have to put the back together. Then the fronts also have a yoke that is at an angle, so it's just kind of a new design thing here. So the back pieces, again, will have a little bit of overlap of the tip from side to side, and then I will sew that on and then flip it up, and then it will be top stitched with the seam allowance going toward the yoke. So it will look like this. And then one thing I will mention, if you're new to sewing and you're not familiar with sewing things at an angle, if you sew and you try to match up the actual edge of your fabric, so you take the actual edge, I'm losing pieces, the actual edge of this tip and the actual edge of this one, and you line them up because you want to sew them together and they're at an angle like this, what will happen if you do that, now let's see if we can do it without, oh, I know, I have an idea. We'll grab some clips and we'll clip it into place. So if you were to line it up so it's exactly matching at those corners, and we'll go ahead and clip those corners at a 1/4 inch seam allowance there and a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, then what happens when you open that up is, look how this edge of the front and this edge of the yoke, they don't line up. They're very, very off, because the seam line is not the edge. The seam line is way down here. So that's why when you line up a piece that's cut at an angle, you want the tips to overlap, because what you're trying to line up is where the fabric actually meets on the seam line. So here we see that if you imagine a 1/4 inch seam line, let's get my little pin. So if you imagine the seam line runs right here, see, hopefully there we go, that'll show, then that's where you want the edge of the fabric to meet. So let's go ahead and clip it now again at a 1/4 inch seam here, and then on this side we'll turn it over to where we can see that tip sticks out. So we're going to clip down to a 1/4 inch seam. Now what happens when you pull that up straight is, now see how that lines up? Now your edge lines up, because you haven't matched the edge of the fabric, you've matched the actual seam line. So when you're sewing things at an angle, that's what you want to do. And so if we have anyone new to the channel or you're new to sewing, I thought we would go over that little bit because it will affect how your pieces fit together. And if you're sewing with a faux vinyl like this, it's essentially plastic. And once you put holes in that, they will be there forever. You can't just go like this and kind of put your fabric fibers back into place because it's plastic and those holes will be there. And then you have to try to cover holes and make sure if you have to redo it, you have to go in deeper, which sometimes can affect the fit. So just to go over when you're sewing things at an angle like that, and against, you want your edges to be straight, but the cross line is an angle, make sure that you're lining up your seam allowance to be where your fabric is flush. So my fabric is flush right here at the seam allowance rather than the tip edges of the fabric. Okay, so there we go. That's the front yoke. Then this design, we'll just lay this on here for now, also has a shoulder flap. I don't know why. I just thought, well, let's try it. Why not? So this piece will be hemmed on the curved edge, and that will be sewn, basted on into place at the corner of the shoulder, the outside corner of the shoulder. So this would be turned under because it will be hemmed. So we'll just turn that edge in. So when you tack it down, it's going to be folded like this, and then your neck edge for the collar will be right next to it. So that little flap will be hemmed. And I don't know, it was just a little design thing. I thought, well, let's see what it looks like. We'll put it on there. I don't know why, but just something new to try. Then this coat will also have 4 front pockets. So we have 2 smaller pockets that will be like this, and then we fold the flap down. So we'll have an upper pocket on each side, and we'll have a lower pocket that is actually bigger towards the bottom. So the jacket will have 4 front pockets, which, I don't know, just another design thing. We thought we'd try it. So there is a lot more detail work on this coat than our previous coat, and so we'll take those steps as we come to them. But the first order of business, of course, will be putting our front pieces together, our back pieces together, and then on the sleeve we'll go ahead and hem this edge. I will put some bastings, 2 lines of basting across the top of the shoulders so we can fit it in easier. And then on, of course, I'll hem this piece. Then on the pockets, I will sew by hand, and I'll knot my threads, and I'll start a little bit below this fold line, and I'll just baste about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and then I'll pull that, which helps to pull this excess in so that that corner will be nice and rounded without a big pleat or fold or a square corner. So if I gather it first, it kind of bunches it up and makes it fold a little bit more evenly, and then that will be hemmed and top stitched in place to hem the top, and then I will also hem this bottom edge. So then when I turn it to do it right sides together to do the side seams, this will already be folded into place when I flip it right side out again, and then it will actually be top stitched onto the garment because it will already be put together. So just a little flash forward to that part. So this is a lot of detail work, and it will take some time. So that will be kind of the last prep sewing we do, because I do want to put the pockets on the front pieces before we actually start sewing the jacket together, just because it's easier to maneuver when I've only got the front and I'm putting the pockets on. When the whole jacket's put together, it's kind of hard to get them on there. So that's all our pieces and what we're going to start on the jacket. So I will start doing some of that prep sewing, and then we'll look at all the pieces that are assembled and ready to start into the pocket process. We're ready to take a look at our pieces. So the sleeves are hemmed, and then I have done some basting stitches so I can gather the top of the sleeve, and then it will kind of be smoothed out as I put it into the garment. But this way, if there's any extra at on the length of the sleeve top compared to the arm socket, then any wrinkles will be up at the top in a gathered fashion to give more room for the shoulder, and then this will smooth out as I place it into the garment. So these sleeves are both ready. The facing is ready, so it has been put together at the shoulders, serged around the edge, and then I also have snipped the center back, as well as, let's see if it'll show up here, snipped to the stay stitching along the neckline, so that separates all those little tabs and just makes it easier to fit the garment in, since it has a very curvy neckline. Then I have the collar finished, and then I also snipped at like 1/4 inch intervals with a center back notch, so it'll be easier to get this collar into the garment. Then the back side has this fabric. It did get a little crooked, but since I snipped that, I should be able to kind of ease that back over, and it will make a lot of little fuzzies, but I should be able to ease that back in, and then it should be fine and lay fairly flat. So the collar's done. Then on the front, I did end up with a little bit of a snag here that wanted to pleat, and so it did get a little bit square right here, but I have the little the yoke put on and top stitched, and then I did put that little flap on the shoulder, and then here you can see I did trim away the little excess that sticks out a little bit. But here you can see by doing that method we used, this line is real nice and straight, and this line is nice and straight. So we did both pieces of the front, so that both of my front sections of the coat are done. Then on the back, I sewed this seam to here. Then I went ahead and started at one edge and just turned it under and top stitched all the way to the end, turned around, went over a couple stitches and came back down, and then I put the yoke on the back and also top stitched that part. So now the back of the coat is open, and this slit in the back is exactly that, just a finished slit. I didn't do any of the overlap and turning, just so that we would have a coat that is a little bit different than the other coat styles. So my next order of business for the coat is to get the pockets ready on the front. So here we have the pockets. I have hand stitched just a basting stitch, and I knotted it here, went all the way around the edge. Now I will just kind of pull so that the center is fairly flat, but then that puts those little wrinkles in the corner, which makes it easier to have that hem put in without as many pleats. I think on this section I should have just gathered it a little bit tighter, and I wouldn't have had that one. So I have this ready. So I also hemmed the other end. Now what I did is, this line that's on the pattern is the fold line for the top flap of the pocket. So what I did is I took the edge of the pocket and I went backwards so that right sides are together, and I lined up the edge. It's about 1/8 of an inch lower than the actual line right here. So let's see if we can move this down. So the line is here, and then that's a fuzzy. The hem is right here. So there's an 1/8 of an inch difference, because that will allow, once the pocket's done, for this flap to go ahead and fold over the pocket with a little bit of room there. So on the pockets, the next thing I need to do is I'm going to stitch from the side where I can see the edge of the hem part, and I'm going to stitch here down to the bottom of the pocket on each one of the pockets, and then once that's done, I'll flip it right side out, and I usually will trim just a little bit of the corner of this seam allowance so it won't be quite so bulky. Then once it's flipped right side out, this is going to automatically turn this way, and so then it'll be less pull on the side, and then I can go ahead and hem the top of the flap of each pocket. So I'll get that done, and when this pocket is finished, then we'll look at how we're going to put it on the coat. Now that these are sewn and I've got the little corners trimmed, then we're going to pinch that to the inside and flip the pocket. There we go, and we'll get the tweezers here for this part of the pocket. So now the pocket looks like this. So the next step, I'm going to smooth out to about here, so I get all the little pleats and gathers up by the actual corners. And we'll put a little tiny clip there and a clip here. See if I can turn it this way. And then we'll do the same thing on this side and put a little clip here, and this kind of smooths all those little gathers right to the corner, and then it keeps this little part of the edge a little bit straighter. And let's see, we'll kind of bring this down so it's about the same distance, so our hem is even. Okay, the next thing is going to be to sink my needle here and just hem this edge of the pocket. Then once that edge is hemmed, then we pull this snug so that my seam is all the way, so you don't have too much of an indent here. You want to kind of roll that in your fingers so that that goes all the way. Then I will decide where I want them to go, and I'm going to top stitch from here down, then across the bottom and back up the other side, and anchor this a little bit with a couple back tacks. Then that will adhere the pocket to the jacket, and then the lid or closure of the pocket will come down, and then I'll secure that with a snap. So I may go ahead and put my snaps in place after I hem this. I'll put my snap in place just because it's easier to maneuver to sew a snap inside when it's not on the jacket yet. But then once the snaps are in place, then I decide where I want the pockets to go, and then I'll have a large pocket towards the bottom, and then we'll fold this, then a smaller pocket up above it. So that's what this is going to look like, but of course these will be turned correctly. So it'll have two large pockets towards closer to the hem, and then two smaller pockets that will be a little higher up. And then I'll probably keep this edge and this edge lined up for the pockets because my coat's going to have to close, and so I want this line because one's smaller than the other. Rather than center it over the underarm, I think I'll have the front edge of the pockets line up with each other. So yeah, so I want to get the pockets put on the front pieces. Now with the fronts all finished and the pockets applied, it is time to connect the front to the back at the shoulders. So we'll do the front and the back, and then I will top stitch the seam allowance open. I did make one change. I top stitched this seam allowance open on both sides of the seams, but I did not want to top stitch over this flap, so I just top stitched along the top edge, and I put all the seam allowance toward that top edge, and now I'm going to trim away a little bit of that seam allowance in kind of a graduated fashion here to reduce a little bit of the bulk at the shoulder. So we'll go ahead and throw those away and reduce that a little bit to make it not quite so bulky on that shoulder. But now that that is done, I'm going to go ahead and snip the center back on my yoke. So first I'll match up where that seam is at the shoulder, and then just fold it back so I can do a small snip here to indicate the center back, and I'm going to snip almost a 1/4 inch in because my seam allowance is gonna, well, it's gonna have to be a little bit smaller because this ended up being a little bit closer to the neckline, so I'm going to have a little bit smaller seam than a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to snip in here and here, just on the sides there. We're not going to go in quite as deep so that I don't sew over the top of that. I'm just going to snip a little bit here because that will enable that neckline to open up a little bit and just make the collar easier to place. So then I will start with the right side of the vinyl to the back so that the inside of the collar is what's printed, and it will show, but that's okay. I'm going to have the inside be the fabric. So I'm going to match the center back, which is this notch, with the center back on the coat. And normally I would pin that, but because it's a vinyl and I don't want to have a bunch of pinholes, I'm going to go ahead and just clip this. And then I will continue clipping from the center back to the outside, and once it's clipped, to verify that I have the same distance from the collar to the front edge on this side as I end up having on this side. And if that matches up, I'm going to baste with a 1/8 inch seam just to hold that collar in place, because this is all thick and slickery and it's hard to hold it still when it's not actually pinned. So I will baste the collar in place. Then once the collar is on, I will then attach the facing, which will sandwich the collar between the right sides of the facing and the coat, and then I will sew up the front on one side around the neckline and then back down the front on the other side. So that will get the collar put in and it'll get the facing put in so that all my seams then end up being nice and finished with no raw edges showing. Now that this much of the coat is done, it is time to put in the sleeves. So the next step will be to open up the coat, and then, let's see, we'll get our collar out of the way. Then we'll take the sleeves, and with the right sides together, once again, I will be starting from the outside and clipping up to the center, and the outside clip up to the center and smooth out this gathering as I put it in. So if there is any excess, it will be at the top of the shoulder. That's why I always start from the outside and work to the top on both sides. So then I'll get the sleeves in. Then once the sleeves are in, fold this way and pretend. So then once the sleeves are in, they will look like this, and I will turn it with the inside out. So here we'll flip it, and I will sew from the end of the sleeve up to the underarm and down the side, and then I will put one little snip right about here in the seam allowance so that the side seam allowance can be open and top stitch like I did here, because with this vinyl that just helps it lay nice and flat. Then once that's done, I will start at the top. Let's see, how do I want to, no, I'll probably start from the hem on the back and hem around the entire hem, and then come up to the top, and then I will stop my top stitching here. So I won't go around the neckline on this coat just because I have this in place. So I won't be doing the top stitching around the neckline unless I find that the coat just doesn't want to have the lining lay in correctly. Then I might go back and add top stitching around the neckline. But for this part, I don't think I want to, because I don't want to risk sewing over the top of this flap. So I will only be top stitching
the front edge and then go around the corner and be hemming this at the same time, and then go up the side seams, come back down, and then end my hemming when I get to the slit in the back. So I'll get the sleeves in and get it hemmed. Then the last bit of work to do will be to put the snaps in the front with the little glass, well actually they're plastic, but the little sparkly beads that I used on the pockets here will also be on the front in acting as the buttons. So I will probably have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buttons going down the front that'll have a snap closure, and then once it's all finished, this facing will be tucked inside the shoulder and tacked down, and then I will probably also tack the center to this seam allowance here to help hold that down. So it will just help hold that facing in place when the garment is finished, so that it isn't flipping out all the time. So yeah, that's about all the steps that are left to do on our jacket, and then it will be finished. I also have the shirt done. So the shirt's all done, it just needs the snaps in the back for the back closure. And I had extra of the bias tape that I made, so I'm going to use this as a tie belt. And then for my pants, I also have cut some strips of the white. I'm going to be top stitching this little edge down on both sides, and then I am going to actually cut those and use that as belt loops, and then the little belt will be threaded through the belt loops on the waistband. So yeah, so I decided to add some belt loops to this pair of pants so I can feature this little tie of belt, so I'm not wasting any of my fabric. And yeah, that and putting the pants together and we'll be done. I haven't shown some of the actual steps in sewing pants in quite a while, so if you're new to sewing the pants and you didn't really want to go back and watch old videos, I totally get that. So I thought I'd show a couple of the little steps just in an abbreviated fashion, because there is something that's going to be a little bit different in this pair. So to put the pockets in, first we take the pocket with right sides together with one of the fronts, and we're going to sew a seam 1/4 inch on the actual pocket opening. So I've sewn that 1/4 inch seam, and then I'm going to trim very close to the seam. So I'm just trimming, being careful not to cut my threads, because you don't want to put a hole in your seam and have it fall apart, right? Now what we'll do is I'm going to turn this right side out and make sure that seam is pulled snug to the right side. So what can happen, and hopefully this will show, let's see if I can look at the camera at the same time. If you don't make sure that that's snug, what that means is see how this seam is still kind of inside, it's not pulled out? If you close that and sew, you're going to change the shape of the opening. So you want to make sure that that seam is pulled all the way to the edges so that the fabric is actually folded against the threads of the seam, and then that makes your edge nice and true to shape. So once you have that, you can press it just to hold it in place. So give me a second here. I'm over at my little iron that's already hot, and I've pressed that. Now I'm going to top stitch very close to that edge. So we'll come over here, and my fabric kind of wants to pull the other piece that's laying over to the side there. So okay, so now we're gonna sink our needle, and on this top stitching, let's see, I don't like that placement, so I'm gonna pull that out. I wasn't quite close enough to the edge. Let's see if my foot will stay up. Okay, and there we go. I think that's better. And I'll sink my needle. And I'm not going to back tack because this top stitching is not actually holding anything together. It's just kind of holding things in place and decorative. So I'm not going to back tack because the ends of those seams of top stitching will be inside the seam allowance when we put things together. And sometimes if you try to back tack, which you always can't do it, but sometimes it'll kind of bunch up your fabric. So I didn't worry about back tacking on the top stitching. So now that you have the top stitching done, now we're going to take this pocket. Oh boy, I'm messing up the camera and everything here. And we're going to take the edge of the pocket and lay it flush with the edge of the side of the pants. So essentially we're just meeting the bottom of the pocket. Now I'm going to lay it down and I'm going to press this down again, holding this corner true so that everything lays flat. And then I'm going to run this bottom edge of the pocket through my serger machine. And I'm just going to do that because I have a serger and I want this edge to be a nice finished edge of fabric because that will be visible inside the garment when it's finished. And to do that, I serge this pocket a certain way. So I'll see if I can change up the camera so we can get a view of how I put the serging on this end of the pocket. Okay, so my lighting is a little weird. I just have a little short tripod for this. But what I'm going to do is, here's a view of my pocket. It's all pressed along this edge. And now I'm going to take the edge of the pocket and I'm going to start at the fold and I'm going to start feeding the folded edge into my serger machine. And I've got the edge of the fabric lined up with the edge of the blade on the serger machine because I don't want to trim anything off. That's just going to be where my edge is. And I'm going to start into the machine and I've only done a couple actual stitches into the fabric. So now what I'm going to do is lift the foot and then I'm going to draw this thread. See how it's kind of bunchy here where it's kind of all wadded up? That's kind of natural on a serger machine. So I'm going to kind of pull that and smooth it because my needles are already sunk in the fabric. And now I'm going to bring that around my needles and put them in front of the blade and lower my foot. Now when I continue sewing, it's going to cut off this excess thread and it's going to tuck those ends inside the sewing. So here we'll go ahead and finish and we're just going to go to the end and take that off. Hopefully my hand won't be in the way too horribly bad. And we'll cut that off. So now what happens is this tag of thread that's left, once we go to put the pants together, this will be on the edge of the pant leg. It'll be on the side, and then that will be naturally trimmed off when I put the sides together. And what happens is then this corner of my pocket, let's see if we can have the light work. There we go. This corner now has a nice finished edge, plus it doesn't have any weird tails of fabric sticking out because they're hidden inside the stitching because I drew it kind of around to the front and then the needle just sewed right over the top of that. So that's kind of how I do the inside of my pockets, just so it's nice and finished and no weird edges. And there's a little bit of bunch of threads here, but they're all tied in. If you have some threads that are loose there, you can always add an additional little drop of fray check to help hold things in place. But that's how I do the inside of the pocket to finish off the lower edge. Now that the pocket is finished, my next step to help secure that pocket in place is I'm going to sew a little, like about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fabric, and I'm going to start above the pocket opening, and I'm just going to sew along the side of the pants, just anchoring down that pocket edge and trim these fabrics. I can also trim away a bunch of the tail there so it's not my way. Trim away those fabrics. So here's the inside, and then on the outside what we have now is the pocket is in place, and this is all secure to the pants, so when I put them together it's not going to get all rumpled or move. My next step is going to be putting the pleats in the pants, which I'll use the pattern to mark the wrong side, and we'll start on the pleats there. Just a funny side note, I was getting my pattern so I could get the correct pants pattern out so I could put the pleats on, and I just want you to see when you get patterns online, just know that your patterns are a lot more pretty than mine. Mine are all scribbled and rumpled, and they don't have any pretty printing on them, so just know that you are getting the better version. Mine are just a mess, and I thought that was kind of funny. To put in the pleat, I've marked the outside edges of the pleat as well as the center. So I'm going to put a pin in one of the outside edges and then bring it back in at the next edge. Then I'm going to do the same kind of towards the bottom of the pleat here, and then come back in. And then I'm going to draw that fold so that it's folded on the dotted line. And now when you're putting a pleat in, the direction of the pleat is totally up to you. So if you want your pleat to fold like towards the center of the pants, then you would take the fold of your fabric towards the pocket, which is what I'm going to do. If you want the fold to go outward like this, then you would fold the pleat towards the center of the pants, towards the center front. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do. Actually, I kind of like that for something different. Maybe I'll go that way. Usually I go back towards the pocket, but that's kind of, I don't know, kind of an interesting look. Should we do that? Okay, but you just want to make sure that you're being consistent so that on both sides of the front, you make sure the pleat is either both of them going towards the center of the pants or both of them fold going towards the pocket. You just want it to match. So when I have that folded and decide what I want to do, now I can go ahead and sew across the top. And I'm just going to go ahead and take the pins out because I'll just hold it there. And I'm going to sew across the top edge to actually hold that in place. Let's see if I can lift up my thing. And my pocket was a little bit more narrow here, and I'm not quite up to the edge, but I'm not sewing on the actual seam line of the pants where the waistband will be, but just a little bit, like 1/8 of an inch again, just to hold the pleat in place. And no back tacking required, but that's just to hold the fabric in place, because then the actual seam will be here, and then this seam is not sewn down at all. Now if you like, you can always actually sew a pleat down for a certain distance, or if you just like a free hanging pleat like this will be, I'm just going to put the waistband on. So I'm not going to sew the pleat down at all. So it's just a couple of different options when you're adding the pleat in. This will be like a free fall pleat. It will just fall from the waistband down. But like I say, you can always take that fold, and where's my other front? Here it is. And here we'll do the fold again on the dotted line, and then fold, there we go. And then we folded that pleat towards the front of the pants. So we'll fold like this. So what you can do if you want that pleat to be sewn down farther is before you sew across the top, you can actually sew down like 1/2 an inch or 3/4 inch, however deep you want to make that. You can sew it down, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to sew across the top so that it is an open folded pleat rather than having it sewn down. So anyway, now I'll go ahead and sew this one since I have it all folded here and ready. So we'll put this in and just sew across the top again. Just like that. I'm just sewing across the top of the pocket as well, just having that all held in place now. So now it's ready that when I put the waistband on, it's all in the correct spot. So now the next step to put the front of the pants together is I'm going to serge the edge of this fabric that makes the fly of the pants. So I'll serge that. I'm going to start at the lower edge and serge towards where the waistband is, just so I can again fold those loose threads up into that serging and have it clean when I go to have this, because this edge of the fabric will be exposed in the finished garment. So I'll do that and come right back. With these edges now serged and finished, I'm going to put right sides together, and I'm going to line up the actual crotch seam of the pants, and I'm going to sew, and let's see, I like to feed it in my machine this direction, just because it's easier for me to see where my fabric is compared to where my needles are and how my hands work. So I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam that'll come a little bit higher, like a 1/4 inch higher than the edge of this fly, and I'm just going to put that seam in, and I will back tack this because this seam is actually holding fabric together, and it is quite a curve, so sometimes you do a few stitches and you might need to lift the needle a little bit, or I'm sorry, lift the foot a little bit to go around that, and then I'll back tack. There we go. So now I can't really put this seam easily into my serger or overlock machine. So what I do is I have it written down here on a trusty little scrappy notepad, is I choose a zigzag stitch on my machine, and I make this zigzag kind of narrow. So on my machine it is a 2.0, so I go 2.0 on my machine for the width of the zigzag, and then on the stitch length, which means how close the stitches are together, I do a 0.5. So that's very small. And what happens is it kind of does like a little interlocking stitch to kind of finish that out. And I'm going to start sewing close to the seam I already have, and it'll kind of anchor, and then it starts going back and forth, and it'll do a few of those stitches, and then I'm going to kind of help pull a little bit there just to get it going through there. I'm turning, and I'll sink the needle one more time and then turn a little bit more. There we go, and come up. Then I'll go ahead and back tack and lift it up and then clear that stitch out of my machine. And so what we end up with is, let's see, hopefully this will show, is it just reinforces this edge, and now I can go in and trim away close to the stitching that I just did and make that a little bit more narrow and get rid of some of that seam allowance. But then it just anchors that and prevents that from having too much possibility to pull loose. So now I have the front of the pants put together. Now on gentlemen's pants, if you have any, like, think, oh, okay, what order, how do I fold them in and on top of each other? If you turn it so that you're looking at the inside pieces, and so the good side is facing away with you, that would be how you put the pants on, right? Like if you're stepping into the pants. So on gentlemen's pants, you want the pants to overlap from the left. So the right side of the pants, this fly will just be laying completely flat, and then the overlap side from the left, the fly will be folded back so that the center seam would line up. And since this fabric is kind of transparent, you can kind of see this is where that fabric is folded, and that is the center front of my pants. So now I'm going to go ahead and on the front, now that that's all folded, I'm going to find the opening of the fly, which is about where my thumbnail is, and I'm going to do a small stitch that will hold that down and hold the fly fabrics in place so that it's anchored and it doesn't come unfolded in kind of a weird way. And I'm going to take that stitch, it's only going to be 2 or 3 little stitches, not very much. I'm going to start on the seam line, and I'm going to sink my needle before I put my foot down, just so I can see a little bit better. So I'm going to sink my needle, then I'm going to put the foot down and just do like 1, 2, and 3, and then I'll back tack 1, 2, 3, then I'll let go and come back 2, 3, bring my needle up, there we go, and then trim my threads. And then these threads I'm going to draw to the inside. I'm pulling everything everywhere here. So I'm going to take these tails of threads and just pull them up enough to where I can get the loops from the front and bring those threads to the inside of the pants, and I'll just tie them off on the inside and then trim them so that on the outside this is anchored and it's going to keep the fly pieces in place so that I don't have weirdo flaps, you know, falling out of the fly of my pants. So that's kind of how I do the front of the pants. Now if you wish, if you are like doing a pair of jeans, a lot of times you'll want to go ahead and on just the side that overlaps, go from that little anchored spot all the way up to the top and have that seam line, which would be like the seam line that holds in a zipper. And you can do that, but because these are dress pants, I'm not going to put that seam on the front. I want it just to look just like fabric, but I do want that little bit of anchoring there. And you can kind of anchor just the fabric on the front, but then sometimes it can still get kind of weird and floppy, so I like to actually anchor it to the pants. Just my preference. You can do however you wish, but that's just the way I do it. So then this is what the front of the pants will look like, so I'll get that tied. Then I have the back, which is just like when we did them before. I did the crotch seam and got that sewn together, then I just put the yoke across the top, so the back is ready. So the next spot after I tie those threads is I'm going to sew the side seams of the pants, the outer side seams, and then once those seams are done, I will hem the pants, and then once it's hemmed, I will turn the pants so right sides together, and I'll sew the inseam. So I'll go from the ankle up to the crotch seam and then back down to the other ankle. And then that will have the pants all put together except for the waistband, which is the bit that I'm going to do different on this pair. And now the pants are put together. They're all hemmed, the inseams are done. So now here's the part that's a little bit different that I'm going to do on these pants. So normally I just put the waistband on and call it good, but I thought because I had made the little tie, like a little belt tie that matches the shirt fabric, I wanted to have some belt loops. So I always cut my waistbands extra long. Usually I'll use like a selvage piece of fabric just so I have extra length, because it's just more comfortable for me to have that extra length. But to do the belt loops, what I want to do first is I want to find the center back of my yoke. So I'm going to match the side seams and just pull that snug, and then on the fold that would be my center back, and I'm going to put a tiny, well, maybe if my scissors will cut, a tiny little notch there. And then I want to find the center of this piece, so I'm going to do here, let's see if I can find the center here. And then I only want to notch one side of the fabric. I guess I should undo that first. There we go. So here's my waistband. Fold it in half, find the center back. There we go. And I have pressed it with the insides together. So this is how the finished product will actually be. But I want to go ahead and notch the back so that I can make sure that my waistband goes all the way around and has enough room on both sides. And it will. Because remember, on your pants, this waistband needs to come to just the finished edge of fabric of your fly, while the other edge of the waistband will go to the folded edge of your fabric. And so if you've only cut the waistband exactly as the pattern is, remember you're going to have to go from the folded edge of one side around the back and then back to the front. You're going to have enough waistband fabric to get all the way to that inside fly that has not been folded. And so sometimes if you automatically find the center of your fabric, it's not actually going to be the center of the waistband lining up with the center back, because you're going to have more fabric on this side to cover this than you will on this side, because this much has been folded in, if that makes sense. So anyway, but this one was cut extra long, and I wanted just to make sure that once, if I do match up the center, that I have enough fabric to come all the way to cover that edge, and I do. So I have a plenty seam allowance there. Okay, so now that I know where the center of my waistband is, to make these belt loops, I have taken just 2 small pieces of fabric and I've folded in each edge so they meet in the middle and just top stitched them down. So hopefully that will show up. And they're just long strips so that it ends up being about 1 centimeter wide or 3/8 of an inch approximately. So what I'm going to do to make the belt loops is, right here is the fold of the waistband, and I want my belt loop to be, at the top of the waistband. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch down the end of the fabric with the wrong side up and the right side of the waistband showing, and I'm going to stitch here, then I'm going to fold it down, and then I'm going to stitch it along 1/8 of an inch seam allowance at the raw edge of the fabric, and then cut it off. So that way I'm working with a longer piece and instead of trying to manipulate tiny pieces of fabric. So I'm going to put my belt loops on before I put the waistband on the pants. So I'm going to have one belt loop in the back, and then the other ones will be placed strategically towards the front. And I think I'll have probably the back one, then one at the side seams, and then one that'll be roughly above where the pleat is on the front. So I think that's where I'm going to place those, and then we'll kind of come back and take a look at the waistband with the belt loops in place. And here is the waistband with all the belt loops put on, and my fold has been maintained. So now they're attached at the top, but this part will actually be sewn into the waistline when I put the waistband on the pants. So now I will simply match up the center belt loop, if I can get on my little threads here, with that notch in the back, and I'll go ahead and pin that one in place, and then pin my waistband around the back. And the back belt loops ended up being not quite at the very side seam of the fabric, which was okay. I just kind of took a look at the placement of like the pockets versus the pleat, and you know, all that type of stuff to kind of decide where I wanted the belt loops. And that's totally up to your own discretion when you're placing belt loops on, is where do you want them? Where do you want them to be? So I have that part decided, and then put the loops on. So now I will turn, and here I am having my fly on the front side that's folded actually folded here. So I have it just like it will be on the finished garment. But on the other side, it will end up being that open flap of fabric, because that's the fly that will rest behind the front, the finished center front of the pants. So we'll pin all this stuff in place. And get my waistband on. And I want to make sure my pleat is laying nicely before I pin that on. There we go. Get that pulled. And hopefully my belt loop placement will be okay. Sometimes fabric shifts a little, which if you, well, I'm not sure how you would actually try to do belt loops by actually sewing them onto the front of the pants, unless instead of having them stitched under the loop on the top, you actually top stitch the loops onto the band on the top edge. But okay, so here we go. We're going to go ahead and sew the waistband in, and then we'll take a look at how I usually finish the edges, the ends, before I sew the inside in place. My belt loops ended up a little shifted on one side, but I don't think I'm going to worry about it. So the center is here. Then this side ended up with this one real close to the side seam, and this one a little bit forward. This one a little bit further from the side seam, and this one placed right at the edge of the pleat. So they're a little bit off, but I'm not going to worry about those. So now to do the inside, because I want the end to be nice, sometimes it's hard to fold this fabric in and then fold it again and then fold in your waistband and have this look nice. This material wouldn't be that hard because it's very thin, but on a heavier fabric sometimes it's a little bit difficult. So generally what I will do to finish off the end of the waistband is with the waistband, so I'm looking at the wrong side of the fabric, I fold this in just like it would be when it's finished. So I give it that 1/4 inch seam allowance fold. Then I fold it backwards so that it matches the edge of what I've already sewn onto the pants. So from the outside, it looks like this. So it has kind of an accordion fold on the waistband. So now I'm just going to sew up and down on this edge right here to finish that end of the waistband. So put it in the machine and line it up. And I'm not worrying about any other part of the waist right now, only that one tiny little seam. So I'm going to sink my needle. I'm going to go from the top of the band down to the edge and then back up again. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to cut away those threads. Now I'm going to trim so it's a little under 1/4 of an inch on the fabric there. Now I can fold this to the inside of the pants and flip it. I don't have any fingernails, so I had to cut them off. They kept getting broken at work. And then, there we go. That's how the end is going to look. It's going to be nice and finished. And so then, because I had that turned under when I sewed it, now all that remains is to hand stitch the waistband into place, covering up all my raw edges inside the waistband and turning that under 1/4 of an inch, and then just hand stitching it into place. So that's what the inside of the pants will look like. And so I'll do the same thing on the other end, and then our pants will be finished with belt loops. Then I'll just put the snap closure on, and it will be time to put all these garments on the doll. In case you're new to sewing and wondering how I actually sew the inside of the waistband down, it's all turned under because we did that seam allowance, so it helps get everything into place when we did the ends. And I just continue with 1/4 inch folded up. And then what I do is I anchor it on one end and go through the front, from the back to the front of the waistband. Then I continue just going right on the top side of the seam where the waistband is, and I just go like 1/8 of an inch stitch through the top part that has the waistband sewn, because then I know it's not going to be on the outside of the pants, and I take my needle through there. Then on the folded edge of the waistband, I come straight up to where that would meet, and I go inside that fold of the waistband, kind of showed where my thumbnail has it, and I pull it through, and then I just kind of tuck that tight. Then where that thread came out of the waistband, I do the same thing again on the part of that's anchored to the pants. So right above that seam line, I just grab about 1/8 of an inch of that fabric right there, and see it doesn't show on the outside. So then I bring my thread through, then I come back up to the waistband again, and I just anchor another 1/8 of an inch or so, and I just continue that and then just kind of pull it taut, and then that produces a waistband on the inside that doesn't show any stitches. That a lot of times you can do like a slip stitch, but that will end up showing. But I like my waistbands to not have any stitches showing from my handwork, and so that's how I do it. So again, I'm just gonna I've just did the waistband stitch, so now I'm coming back to the pants, and I'm just gonna go in and pick up about 1/8 of an inch of fabric there, pull it. Now I'm going to go to the waistband and go inside that fold of fabric and then back out, and it just produces a nice hidden stitch that hides everything up inside of that waistband, but doesn't end up having any stitches showing on the outside. So that's how I do it. You can do a slip stitch where you just kind of make little diagonal stitches. What I would recommend, especially on doll clothing, is just whichever method you choose, keep your stitches small because it looks better. And with smaller garments, you want those stitches to be closer together, because too big of a gap between your stitches can cause your garments to look like they're not put together well. So just keeping small stitches, but that's how I like to do it. I like to have more of a hidden stitch. So that's how I put the waistband inseam, or the inside of the waistband. That's how I sew it down. So it looks nice and pretty when I'm finished. So just thought I'd put that in there in case anybody was wondering. Here is the finished outfit, and I do have some clips here. We'll remove these just to kind of help get that used to being folded over like that. So here is the coat with the pockets all done, and these have snap closures so that you can put something in the pocket if you want, and both the top and bottom pockets are done that way. I use some little gem beads for buttons, so it has a total of 5 snaps on the front. And because this lapel is supposed to lay down, I did not put the snap at the very top of the jacket because it's supposed to lay more like a lapel. And I did have fun with the facing of the collar and the coat matching the top, because it kind of gives a little bit of a faux collar look to the shirt, but then of course when you take the coat off, then it just looks more like a t-shirt. So then here's our belt loops on the front of the pants, and just a tie belt that matches the shirt, which I thought was fun. So we'll swing around, look under the arms. We have the top stitching that goes up the seam and back down again, that helps hold that faux leather seam allowance in place and keep it flat, so it doesn't pucker and bunch too bad. I do have the stand underneath here, so it's kind of poking a little bit. I don't want him to fall over here. Let's see if we can bend his knees a little bit better. Okay, so we do have a small slit. Oh, and I need to trim this. Here we go. I did the hem and facing and all that, or top stitching. There we go. I can't speak today. So there is a slit in the back as well as on the sides. I kept that the same. And there, we don't want him to tip over. So that is the outfit for RM in blue. So that's the blue coat. And I thought it would be fun to go ahead and put all the fellas we have done together, so we can take a look at the collection thus far. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get all of them here and take a look at all of them. And here is the collection thus far. We have 5 done. So we start on the left with J-Hope in red, and then we move to Shuga in orange, Jimin in yellow, V in green, and RM in blue. So yeah, this is how they all look so far. So if you haven't seen all the other videos, we'll do a quick recap. We have the red jacket in a baseball style. Then we have a shirt style jacket printed for orange. Yellow has more of a, I don't even know what style that is, but there you go. More of a blazer in green, and then more of just a straight coat, a little bit longer than the yellow, of course, and a little bit longer than the red. So yeah, so those are the colors and the jackets we have done so far. That leaves the purple jacket for Jungkook, and then also a pink coat for Jin that are left to finish out the series. So this has been a lot of fun so far. And yeah, so we have 2 more outfits to finish the collection, and that will finish our 7 coats in 7 color series. So yeah, stay tuned and we'll get the last ones done. My friend is from South Korea, and she's going to be going back for a trip here this next month, and she was joking. She told me the other day, she says, you know, you should come with me and we'll just make clothing for BTS. And I said, okay, that's what we'll do. So anyway, it was funny, and so I will wish her a safe and happy trip. And then yeah, so we'll keep moving on to finish out our projects for this series. See you next time. Bye.